Superman had a ridiculous amount of pressure riding on it, and did so for many reasons. Firstly, acclaimed director James Gunn's newest Superman film needed to resuscitate an iconic yet languishing superhero franchise that hasn't been the focal point of a good movie since the 1970s, despite many attempts. Secondly, Superman, the 2025 version, needed to relaunch DC's cinematic universe via the DCU after the prior continuity, the one meant to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, failed to gain sustainable traction, where most movies ranged from mid to bad, with a few good to great projects in between those fuck-ups, some of which were directed by James Gunn. You know, the guy directing the new Superman film, and is now in charge of the DCU's continuity alongside Peter Safran, which is important to note because the previous DC film continuity deflated like a punctured air mattress fucked by a horny gopher. Thirdly, Warner Bros. Discovery, the owner of DC, has endured a rough few years financially, with numerous box office bombs like Joker 2 dropping a deuce. And while the movie studio has been riding high after a string of numerous financial hits, in 2025, the year of our Lord, a successful Superman movie would symbolize Warner's recent rebound as they attempt to launch a new era of DC superheroes, starting with its most important hero at the center. And then fourthly and finally, James Gunn felt the heat from the previous DCEU continuity's fandom, given that's the amount of people who loved Zack Snyder's take on DC, while definitely not representative of the vast majority of filmgoers, wasn't non-zero. If anything, the DCEU's fandom featured enough people that it could be considered as a fandom, and one that was terminally online at that, even to the point of toxicity. And look, to be clear, not all fans of the Snyderverse are mean, terrible people, because to say that the bad actors reflected the feelings of everyone in that fandom would be, you know, kind of a disservice to anyone else that wasn't a complete asshole. It'd be unequivocally false. But unfortunately, the number of them that have and still do engage in that type of shit also isn't non-zero, meaning that James Gunn had to navigate that treacherous terrain as well, all alongside all the other hurdles he had to face when making this movie. And taken as a whole, whether we are discussing Superman's revival as a character and franchise, the future of James Gunn's and Peter Safran's take on the DCU continuity, Warner Bros. Discovery's financial stake in this whole enterprise, and handling the previous fandom's worst internet trolls, a lot was riding on Superman's success. Warner Bros. Just went all in on Superman, as well as James Gunn's and Peter Safran's, perspective of what they want the DCU continuity to be. Meaning that at the box office, Superman needed to deliver a super fisting. And that's all even before taking the movie's quality into account. Because yes, even aside from all the other aforementioned reasons and bullshit, Superman as a movie still needed to be good. Which individually, as a viewer, is the most important thing here. Because forget about box office and the overall machinations and plans for a whole new continuity of superheroes. The most critical element of this story to each of us as a member of the audience is whether or not we enjoyed the movie, whether we think it succeeds as a cinematic venture. And for what it's worth, in my humble opinion, yeah, Superman is good. It's really good. In fact, it is a return to form for a cinematic franchise that, since the 1970s, hasn't really had any form at all. If anything, Superman does a complete 180-degree turn from Zack Snyder's take on Superman, i.e. 2013's Man of Steel and 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which were just very grimdark portrayals of superheroes rather than hopeful and optimistic ones. And that also included a version of Superman who, despite being one of the most on-the-nose Jesus Christ metaphors of all time, could often be cold and emotionally distant, as well as how he didn't really dwell on the collateral damage resulting from his superpowered fights, especially ones occurring in Metropolis, which were reminiscent of New York City on September 11th. Because when I think of Superman, I also think of 9/11. Yet this new Superman film is diametrically opposed to that take that was featured in Man of Steel. In fact, this film recaptures the spirit of Superman as a character, played by David Corenswet. Superman is kind, empathetic, a pacifist but will defend himself and others from violence when necessary, uses his powers to make the world a better place, is polite and corny in an old-fashioned yet charming sort of way, cherishes all life around him, even that of an innocent squirrel, which is the rare time where a person is morally superior to everyone's favorite golden retriever. And speaking of dog, he cares for his dog. Because, of course, Superman has a dog. Which means that now, all of a sudden, millions of millennial white women really care about Superman, meaning that Superman is a good-natured man. The movie focuses on his humanizing characteristics just as much, if not more so, than his godlike super abilities. That's the Clark Kent aspect of his personage is just as important to Superman's identity as his costumed superhero look. The movie just presents Superman as a hero worth rallying behind. And oddly enough, that's a really refreshing perspective on the character. Hell, even beyond Superman's grim portrayal in the Snyderverse, modern pop culture is inundated with evil Superman-type characters like Homelander and The Boys and Omni-Man and Invincible, which are both shows on Amazon Prime, a company that was founded and once owned by this man cosplaying as Lex Luthor. So just to see a version of Superman that was just a really nice and swell guy was just a great change of pace. I mean, speaking for myself, I didn't realize how much I needed that for my own fucking sanity. Like, so many Superman stories and narratives with Superman-coded characters are just immensely cynical. And while that doesn't make those said stories inherently bad, there has been a void of hopeful and optimistic versions of Superman or Superman-adjacent characters to the point that the absence has been felt, to the point that I have to question whether or not many creatives are flat out ashamed of this character or character archetype in some capacity. That his morality and sense of justice for all and overall sense of doing good is too hokey and even unrealistic or whatever. Because being a good person in this economy? I don't think so. Yet Superman just gives an age-appropriate middle finger to that notion. In this film, Clark Kent is just an immensely likable guy and is unloathable unless you are a complete asshole. If anything, I couldn't help but to feel a sense of admiration for Superman, given that he represents everything that is and can be good about humanity and is thus worth emulating. Just like very old Nintendo games that are very difficult to get a hold of by traditional means. You know, because why can't there be someone as good as Clark Kent? Why shouldn't we aspire to be as virtuous as Superman? To have the same type of empathy for other people that he has. Because ultimately, if being as righteous and virtuous as Superman makes me really fucking cringe, I am very proud to be the mistress of cringe. Now drop down and give me 30 or I'll do you dirty. And Superman's kind nature is all in spite of the cynical world that he resides in. In fact, at this current moment of the DC continuity, metahumans, read superpowered individuals, have existed for 300 years and are either criminals, vigilantes, or hero teams like the Justice Gang, consisting of Nathan Fillion's Green Lantern Guy Gardner, Eddie Gathegy's super intelligent Mr. Terrific, and Isabella Merced's high-flying Hawk Girl, who all do hero work on behalf of the United States government and are thus required to toe the political line. In other words, the Justice Gang isn't allowed to interfere with geopolitical conflicts, even if it would save the lives of innocent civilians. The United States government will not tolerate it. Furthermore, many regular folks, and even other metahumans, use Superman's heroics as being out of place. After all, this world in the DCU continuity has conditioned the vast majority of its denizens to be cynical and distrustful of everyone else, even those acting in a benevolent manner. Because by this world's logic, people just aren't supposed to be this good, this morally righteous, without an ulterior motive. You know, because people equal shit and all that. Meaning that many people ponder what Superman's game or angle is. Hey, people being nice is just unrealistic here. But here is the thing. Wrong movie. Superman is that morally pure, even to the point of being charming. If anything, his golly gee Willikers personality is incredibly endearing, and his heroic escapades are always noble and altruistic. Hell, I doubt he even illegally downloaded all that shitty pop punk that he likes off of LimeWire. Which is impressive, because the peer pressure to do that shit was immense back in the day. Especially considering that I doubt there were many record stores in Cornville, Kansas, population 20. And as a movie, Superman champions the values belonging to its lead character. The film wears its heart on its sleeve, positing that this world needs more kindness and empathy for others, the type of values that Superman frequently displays, which is just an impressive statement in its own right. After all, we have seen so many projects vilify Superman or Superman-adjacent characters by a script that is, at the worst of times obnoxiously cynical, and at the best of times is this piss baby. And while the world of the DCU is cynical, Superman's virtuous core character attributes are elevated to the point of being awe-inspiring. That his overall sense of good in the face of this often cruel and unjust world is as jaw-droppingly astounding as his super strength and ability to fly. Because the cynical world of the DCU tries to tear Superman down, but Superman doesn't buckle beneath that pressure, which in the film just elevates Superman's heroic nature as a result. He's just a symbolic beacon of hope in this sad world. And that makes him the hero that we need in this current moment of time. Because let's not forget that at this moment in time, America is currently experiencing the deep sad. The type where the nation's sorry state of affairs just has us desiring to sit in our cars and devour a burrito while we sob uncontrollably, which is a weekly occurrence for some of us. And can you really blame me? Or us, rather? As the United States descends further into fascism, where cruelty is championed as a form of strength, it's impossible to ignore the fall of the American Empire in Superman's backdrop. And that's by design. After all, the antagonist in Nicholas Holt's loathsome Lex Luthor is a billionaire businessman who loathes Superman for his inherent super capabilities and is thus plotting schemes to utterly destroy him. Phrasing. Thus, Lex Luthor manipulates public opinion, colludes with fascist strongmen, utilizes the prospect of a foreign genocide to his advantage, toys with the American government and its politicians, and disappears his critics and enemies without due process via detention centers and a secret police. As I said, the real-world political parallels just can't be ignored in this film. All to the point that right-wing media is up in arms over Superman 2025. Firstly because director James Gunn said that Superman is an immigrant story, which is true because Superman was created by immigrants and Superman himself is a refugee from another planet, meaning that in the comics, Superman's parallel to the immigrant and refugee experience has been explicit in the source text since the comic's inception, and secondly because there are just many commonalities with real-life adjacent events that it's hard not to read Superman as a film as a critique against MAGA and Trumpism, which isn't a difficult logical leap to make, because akin to the events of the movie, the American government is being influenced by billionaires with no regulatory restraint, social media and the internet is a cesspool that just make the act of being online miserable. The powerful, whether it be fascists or oligarchs aligned with the fascists, use technology, communication, and political levers to manipulate our conception of reality. Our media is refusing to ask the right questions and holding these vile entities to account. There's the fact that we are isolating ourselves from the rest of the world to the detriment of everyone. There's the genocide in Gaza. And then there's also the people who are being disappeared by a secret police without due process and placed in overnight long-term holdings with a massive amount of other prisoners. You know, kind of like camps with a large concentration of people. God, I wonder if there's a word for that. So yes, there are many aspects of our political reality that Superman reflects as a movie. The film just echoes the current dire state of America, meaning that the world of the DCU and our shared hellscape are kind of inseparable from one another, which was just such an inspired creative decision on behalf of the filmmakers, mostly because, adjacent to the world of the DCU, our collective reality is very cynical as well, and thus watching a nice and polite Superman who cares for the world around him is just incredibly wholesome to behold, because the fact that he champions golly gosh values and believes every life is worthy of saving, all while he has this infectious optimism in the face of a world gone horribly wrong, acts as a medicine for so many of us in real life reeling from the pain inflicted by this authoritarian administration, meaning that as a country, and possibly as a world, we the people needed this, because as a film, Superman meets the moment. And admittedly, as alluded to earlier, a lot of the right-wing media isn't very thrilled with Superman's political themes. But then again, if they're upset about how Superman as a movie is unapologetically against abducting people without due process, is anti-genocide, anti-isolationist, anti-fascist, anti-oligarch, and etc., maybe they should get mad at the fact that their real-life political party of choice condones and even enthusiastically supports similar un-American and anti-democratic activity. Because, you know, maybe it's not the movie that has gone wrong, but it's actually them instead. Because maybe they should fix themselves and take the primary lesson for this film. They should try to be kind to others and have some empathy. You know, perspective, y'all. Additionally, Superman's political angle imbues the film with a sense of personality, which is impressive because many films by DC's competitors over at Marvel Studios can feel very similar at times. Hell, even the good ones can feel this way at times. Though let me state that Marvel can still release exceptional material. Hell, Thunderbolts is one of my favorite movies of the year so far, so take that for what it's worth. But this doesn't really change the fact that a lot of Marvel movies are just fine enough and even good without being all that distinct, meaning that Superman stands out as a film because it has depthful narrative layering. It's basically cinematic moussaka. However, as impressive as that is in the current superhero economy, it is hardly surprising considering that the man directing the movie is James Gunn. After all, James Gunn films are distinctly James Gunn films. Hell, even when he was creating the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy for his now competitor over at Marvel Studios, Gunn's films maintained his unique and quirky oddball style. Movies with a dark sense of humor and stylistic panache, all while also featuring flawed yet likable protagonists. And in Superman, this includes the earlier mentioned political background and the need to be empathetic in a world that's losing its empathy, but it also represents the controversy that James Gunn found himself in the late 2010s, where he was the focal point of a bad faith internet cancellation campaign where conservatives tried to ruin Gunn's career, but humorously enough, eventually resulted in backfiring spectacularly, seeing as his career has become even more impressive and successful since then. And this, in some capacity, finds its way back into Superman. Though I'm not really gonna say how due to spoilers, but it is pretty fucking fun. Furthermore, James Gunn's films are also unique because they feature morally flawed yet human characters, and that's true for the protagonist in Superman as well, save for Superman himself, who is already perfect because he is Superman. He flosses daily, but rather the rest of the characters are morally faulty to varying degrees. There's the aforementioned horribly titled Justice Gang, led by this douche bozo with the Beatles cut. You know, for a hero that can create stuff with his imagination, you'd think that Green Lantern could imagine himself a better fucking haircut. But then there's also Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane, who is more than just a love interest for Clark Kent in this film, and is more a Superman skeptic who desires to be a believer, but was conditioned to be jaded by the cold, cruel reality of this world, which is relatable because that point of view echoes the perspective of the audience as well. You know, because we crave the idea of hope, but we don't want that said hope to be false. And the same goes for Lois Lane and her approach to Superman. Though I imagine that their sex kicks ass. I mean, just come on. Think about how good it would feel to get railed by Superman. Like entire office buildings downtown would be shaking and shit, making us all get ready to be rocking in the free world. And whether we are referring to Lois or the Chuckle Fucks and the Justice Gang, these characters have arcs of their own as they learn that Superman's morally just approach to his heroics is a worldview worth cherishing rather than mocking. That these characters, alongside how their flaws make them darkly comical, especially in the case of the Justice Gang, can eventually become the best version of themselves too. Additionally, Superman reflects James Gunn's unique style by embracing the property's silly comic book origins. Like, this movie is just proud to be based on a comic book character that is over 80 years old. Something that we can see in the variety of action scenes where Superman saves people from collapsing buildings, fighting giant-sized, goofy-looking monsters, and utilizing his powers to pummel his enemies, all while being conscious enough to avoid collateral damage, which also definitely appears to be a potshot against the Man of Steel's previous incarnation. And that's all even before we get to Krypto the Superdog, who in this household is the only Krypto we stand, because Krypto is for puppers, not money laundering. Superman just relishes in the act of being from an iconic American comic book creation. James Gunn also adds his trademark dark sense of humor to the proceedings, something that I worried wouldn't have made the cut in a Superman film, but I am nonetheless pleased to have those concerns put to rest. Mostly because while Superman doesn't engage in black comedy, the rest of the DCU's cynical world isn't above such jokes and putting our protagonists in certain situations that elicited schoolgirl giggles from me. I didn't even know how I was capable of doing that. In fact, the line delivery from everyone is on point. Lois is eye-rolling over how her super boyfriend is too trusting, Guy Gardner being a colossal douche nozzle, Lex Luthor just being a contemptible human being, Hawkgirl's inspired deadpan, and then there's just Mr. Terrific, who is the funniest character in this movie in regards to his line delivery, self-serious demeanor, and personal motivations. If anything, he's just an absolute riot in this film. So as you can see, I really enjoyed Superman as a movie. It's fun, captures the spirit of Superman, both as a character and as a comic book property. The action is engaging, the protagonist and the supporting cast are great, and the movie is rooted with political morals in a way that gives audiences in the real world hope, all despite how bleak reality is right now. It's a fantastic film. However, this doesn't mean that Superman is without fault. After all, Lois Lane is the only female character in the film with major narrative and character building meat and dimension, and the movie just starts in the middle of the action, foregoing an origin story, which admittedly was an overall good decision because we have seen the Superman origin story play out a multitude of times in film and TV, so a new movie narratively retreading those familiar story beats would have been redundant. But with that being said, this still runs into a problem, mostly because Superman, as a film, requires an extensive amount of exposition to get audiences up to speed as to what is happening in the narrative, all to the point that some of this said exposition is painfully unnatural. Like, there's many moments where characters explain plot-crucial lore and past events to other characters who already know about that said plot-crucial lore and were present for those said past plot-crucial events. You know, because they were there. It'd be like a horny teenager explaining to the monster under the bed that he had jerked it earlier. Because to be clear, the monster under the bed already knew that shit, and the horny teenager knew that the monster under the bed was already present. That was just part of the thrill. And while not all of the exposition in the early goings was heavy-handed, in fact, the movie cleverly had Lois Lane interview Superman, which allowed the film to inform viewers of all the relevant story details in a way that felt natural, a lot of the exposition was still uneven, which caused the first 15 or maybe 20 minutes to struggle, as the movie just kind of had to explain everything, all before we, the viewer, finally got caught up with the events on screen and are swept up by this otherwise awesome movie. It just unfortunately takes some time to get there. With that said though, Superman is a triumph. The movie just captures the spirit of Superman, reflects the unique style of its director, acts as a fun comic book movie, has something meaningful to say about the fraught state of the world, and the film emphasizes the need for kindness in a world that's often bereft of it. Though maybe not kindness to fascists, as the movie makes abundantly clear, because fuck those losers, but rather kindness in general, and having hope that we can defeat a powerful evil and overcome our immense feelings of despair at this moment in history. Meaning that Superman brought hope and optimism back in these dark times, becoming both the movie and the hero that we need and deserve. So yeah, as you can tell, I really enjoyed Superman as a film, though that is just my opinion. Please tell me in the comments what you thought about Superman 2025 and James Gunn's take on the DCU. Tell me if you're excited for any upcoming projects like Supergirl. Also, please like and subscribe, as it helps my channel a ton, which is true because it does. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Drink plenty of water.